The encounter. The wind moved like a whisper across the dry hills, bending the tall grass in slow, deliberate waves as though the land itself was breathing. Amina walked among her flock with practiced ease, her steps light but purposeful, her gaze sharp despite the quiet monotony of the day. She had spent years in these pastures, learning the moods of the sky and the stubborn will of sheep, yet nothing here ever truly belonged to her, not even her future. In 3 weeks, she would marry Khalid. The thought settled heavily in her chest, like a stone she had long ago accepted she must carry. Khalid was a man admired by the village, strong, composed, dependable. He spoke with confidence and moved with the assurance of someone who had never been denied. People trusted him. They respected him. And soon, Amina would belong to him. She tightened her grip on her staff, her jaw stiffening. Belong. The word echoed with a quiet bitterness she rarely allowed herself to acknowledge. A sudden gust of wind stirred the edges of her shawl, snapping her attention back to the present. The sky had begun to darken, clouds gathering with unusual speed. Amina frowned. Storms did not come this quickly, nor this silently. The air felt charged, as if holding its breath. Not today, she murmured under her breath, urging the flock to move faster. But nature did not bargain. Within moments, the wind grew harsher, tearing through the hills with a rising howl. Dust spiraled into the air, stinging her eyes and blurring her vision. The sheep bleated anxiously, clustering together as the first drops of rain struck the earth, sharp, cold, unforgiving. Amina's heart quickened. She scanned the horizon, searching for shelter. There, a jagged formation of rocks, partially hidden by the slope. A cave. "Move!" she called, her voice firm despite the chaos. Guiding as many sheep as she could, she pushed toward the shelter, her body leaning against the wind. The storm roared louder with every step, swallowing her thoughts, her fears, everything except the need to survive its force. By the time she reached the cave, she was breathless, her clothes damp, her hair clinging to her face. The sheep huddled near the entrance, but Amina stepped deeper inside, seeking warmth and stillness. And then she froze. Someone was already there. A man stood near the back wall, half-shadowed by the dim light filtering through the cave's mouth. He was tall, unfamiliar, his presence as sudden and jarring as the storm outside. His clothing was unlike anything she had seen in her village, his posture alert but not aggressive. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Amina's pulse pounded in her ears. Every instinct told her to turn and leave, but the storm raged too fiercely behind her. She had no choice. "I did not know this place was occupied," she said, her voice steady despite the tension coiling in her chest. The man inclined his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "Nor did I expect company." His voice was calm, measured, carrying an accent she could not place. Silence stretched between them, thick with uncertainty. Amina kept her distance, her body rigid, her mind racing with questions. Who was he? Why was he here? And why did his presence unsettle her in a way she could not explain? A sudden crack of thunder echoed through the cave, sharp and deafening. Startled, Amina stepped back, but her foot slipped against the damp stone beneath her. The world tilted. Before she could catch herself, she lost her balance, falling toward the ground. But she never struck it. Strong hands caught her. The contact was brief, instinctive, yet it sent a shock through her entire body. For a fraction of a second, she was painfully aware of everything. The warmth of his grip, the closeness between them, the way her shawl had loosened in the fall. Her breath hitched, and then she realized. Her modesty compromised. Time seemed to stop. Amina pulled away immediately, her hands trembling as she clutched her shawl, securing it tightly around herself. Her heart raced, her thoughts colliding in a storm far more violent than the one outside. The man stepped back at once, his gaze lowering, as though to restore the boundary that had been broken. "I meant no harm," he said quietly, but the damage was already done. In her world, such a moment could not simply be dismissed. It carried weight. consequence, finality. Amina lifted her chin, forcing her voice to remain steady despite the turmoil inside her. "You've seen me exposed," she said, each word deliberate, unwavering. "Now you must marry me." The man looked at her then, truly looked, his expression shifting for the first time. Surprise, confusion, something deeper flickering beneath the surface. The storm raged on outside, relentless and unyielding. And within the cave, a different kind of storm had just begun. Hidden truths. The storm weakened by morning, but its aftermath lingered in the air, heavy and unsettled. Amina walked ahead of her flock in silence, the damp earth clinging to her sandals, her thoughts refusing to quiet. The memory of the cave replayed itself with relentless clarity. The fall, the stranger's hands, the moment that had altered everything. She had spoken without hesitation, driven by instinct and the weight of tradition. "You've seen me exposed. Now you must marry me." The words had not been a plea, nor a question, but a declaration shaped by the world she knew. Yet the man, Ryan, as he had finally introduced himself, had not responded as expected. "I do not take a wife because of an accident," he had said, his voice calm but firm. "Nor do I claim a life I do not understand." His refusal had not been cruel. It had been measured, almost respectful, but it had unsettled her more than anger would have. In her world, there were rules that defined consequence, lines that could not be crossed without resolution. Ryan seemed to exist beyond those lines. Amina tightened her grip on her staff as the village came into view. The familiar cluster of homes, the rising smoke, the distant murmur of voices. Everything appeared unchanged. And yet, nothing felt the same. By the time she reached her home, Khalid was already waiting. He stood near the entrance, composed as always, his presence commanding without effort. His eyes settled on her immediately, scanning her as though measuring something unseen. "You were gone longer than usual," he said. Amina paused, steadying herself. "The storm delayed me." Khalid nodded, though his gaze lingered a moment too long. "You should be more careful. Soon, you will not walk these hills alone." The implication was clear. Soon, she would no longer walk them at all. Amina lowered her gaze briefly, masking the flicker of resistance that rose within her. "Of course." He studied her a moment longer, then softened his tone. "Preparations are nearly complete. The elders are pleased." She forced a faint nod, though the words felt distant. Pleased. The village approved. Everything was proceeding exactly as it should. Everything except her. Later that day, Amina sought the only place where her thoughts could settle, the narrow path leading back toward the hills. She told herself she needed to check the flock again, but the truth was harder to deny. She was searching for him. The cave stood quiet now, the storm's violence reduced to damp stone and scattered debris. For a moment, she hesitated at the entrance, her breath catching with an unfamiliar tension. Then she stepped inside. Ryan was there. He stood near the same place as before, his posture relaxed yet aware, as though he had anticipated her return. When he saw her, he did not seem surprised. "You came back," he said. Amina lifted her chin slightly. "I needed answers." He regarded her calmly. "And have you found them?" "Not yet." The silence that followed was not hostile, but it carried a weight neither of them ignored. Amina studied him more closely now, the quiet strength in his stance, the restraint in his expression. He was not like the men of her village, who spoke in certainty and acted within expectation. Ryan seemed guided by something less visible, yet more deliberate. "You speak of choice," she said finally. "But where I come from, choice is not always given." Ryan's gaze sharpened slightly. "Then perhaps that is where the problem begins." His words unsettled her, not because they were harsh, but because they rang too close to truth. Amina turned away briefly, her thoughts shifting to Khalid, to the life awaiting her. "There are things I cannot change," she said quietly. Ryan did not respond immediately. When he did, his voice was softer. "And yet, you came here." Before she could answer, voices echoed faintly from outside. Amina stilled. She moved toward the cave's entrance, her heart tightening as she recognized the familiar tones. Khalid. And another voice, Zara. Amina stepped just close enough to see without being seen. They stood near the base of the hill, their figures partially obscured by the terrain. Zara's posture was tense, her hands clasped tightly, while Khalid stood too close, closer than friendship allowed. "You worry too much," Khalid was saying, his tone low but reassuring. "No one suspects anything." Zara hesitated. And Amina? At the mention of her name, Amina's breath caught. Khalid exhaled slowly. She sees what she is told to see. The word struck harder than any accusation. Zara looked uncertain, but she did not step away. "This cannot continue after the marriage." Khalid's expression darkened slightly. "It will continue as I decide." Amina's chest tightened, the pieces falling into place with painful clarity. The whispers, the absences, the subtle shifts she had dismissed. They were no longer shadows of doubt, but undeniable truth. She stepped back into the cave, her pulse unsteady, her thoughts racing. The world she had trusted, the future she had accepted. It was built on something fragile, something false. Ryan watched her carefully, his expression unreadable but attentive. "What did you see?" Amina met his gaze, her voice steady despite the storm rising within her. "The truth," she said. Outside, the wind stirred once more, quieter now, but no less persistent. And for the first time, Amina understood that the real storm had only just begun. The betrayal revealed. The truth did not arrive with noise or spectacle. It settled quietly within Amina, heavy and immovable, like a stone dropped into still water. By the time she left the cave, her steps were steady, but something essential within her had shifted beyond repair. The village carried on as it always had, voices rising in familiar rhythms, smoke curling into the sky, the illusion of order untouched. Yet Amina saw it differently now. Every glance, every greeting, every gesture felt layered with something she had been too trusting to notice before. Khalid found her before sunset. "You've been distant," he said, his tone controlled, though a trace of impatience lingered beneath it. "People are beginning to notice." Amina met his gaze without hesitation. "Then perhaps they're seeing clearly for the first time." A flicker of irritation crossed his face, brief but unmistakable. What is that supposed to mean? For a moment, she considered saying nothing, preserving what remained of dignity through silence. But silence had protected him, not her. "I saw you," she said simply. The words hung between them, sharp and irreversible. Khalid's expression did not crumble as she expected. Instead, it hardened, his posture straightening as though preparing for negotiation rather than confession. "You saw something you misunderstood." Amina felt a quiet clarity settle over her. "I saw enough." He exhaled slowly, shifting his weight. "Zara is complicated. It is nothing that concerns you." The dismissal struck deeper than anger would have. Not denial, not regret, only control. "It concerns me," Amina replied, her voice unwavering, "because you intend to make me your wife." Khalid's gaze sharpened. "And I will. This changes nothing." The certainty in his tone was not reassuring. It was suffocating. "It changes everything," she said. For the first time, a crack appeared in his composure. "You are overreacting." Amina almost smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "No, I am seeing." Before he could respond, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the space where his authority had always been unquestioned. But truth demanded more than quiet acknowledgement. That night, Amina sought Zara. She found her near the edge of the village, where the lantern light dimmed and the shadows stretched longer. Zara turned at the sound of her approach, her expression shifting instantly. Surprise, then something guarded. "Amina," she said carefully, "I was wondering where you had been. Were you?" Amina stepped closer, her gaze steady. "Or were you wondering if I'd seen?" Zara's breath caught, the color draining slightly from her face. For a moment, she said nothing. "That is answer enough," Amina continued. Zara looked away, her composure faltering. "You do not understand. Then explain it to me." Silence lingered, thick with unspoken tension. When Zara finally spoke, Her voice carried a mixture of defiance and vulnerability. "He was never meant for you," she said. "You were simply convenient." The words landed with quiet precision. Amina tilted her head slightly. "And you?" Zara's jaw tightened. "I was overlooked." The honesty was unexpected, but did not soften the betrayal. "So you chose to take what was mine," Amina said. Zara met her gaze again, something almost pleading beneath her resolve. "I chose what should have been mine from the beginning." Amina studied her for a long moment, searching for the friend she once trusted. But that version of Zara no longer existed, if it ever had. "You did not take him from me," Amina said finally. "You revealed him." Zara flinched, the truth cutting deeper than accusation. By morning, the confrontation could no longer be contained. Words spread quickly. Whispers carried from one home to another, gathering weight with every retelling. By midday, the village square was filled with restless voices, drawn by the promise of conflict. Khalid stood at the center, composed but watchful. Zara remained at a distance, her presence both acknowledged and avoided. And Amina stepped forward with a calm that silenced the rising noise. "This marriage will not take place," she said. The words rippled through the crowd, disbelief turning to murmurs. Khalid's expression darkened. "You will not make such decisions alone. I already have." He stepped closer, his voice lowering. "Be careful, Amina. You risk more than your pride." She held his gaze, unshaken. "I risk nothing that was not already broken." A murmur of tension moved through the onlookers. Khalid's restraint began to fracture. "You would throw away your future for a misunderstanding?" For a moment of doubt, Amina's voice remained steady. "I would refuse a future built on deceit." The simplicity of her words left no room for argument. For the first time, Khalid had no response. The silence that followed was not empty. It was decisive. Amina turned away from the crowd, from the expectations that had once defined her, from the life that had been arranged without her consent. Her steps carried her beyond the edge of the village, toward the hills that had always offered her solitude, toward the only place that now felt honest. When she reached the cave, Ryan was already there. He looked at her as she approached, his expression searching, as though measuring the weight she carried. "It is done," she said. Ryan studied her carefully. "And what does that mean for you?" Amina paused, the question settling deeper than she expected. For the first time, her path was not dictated by duty or fear, but by something far more uncertain. "It means," she said slowly, "that I must choose." The wind moved softly through the hills, no longer violent, but no less persistent. And as Amina stood between what she had lost and what she had yet to claim, she understood that choice was not freedom without cost. It was freedom with consequence. The choice. The hills were quieter than Amina remembered, as though the land itself had withdrawn into reflection. The wind no longer howled or demanded attention. It moved gently now, brushing against the tall grass in soft, measured strokes. It was the kind of silence that followed upheaval, the world settling, but not yet restored. Amina stood at the mouth of the cave, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The village lay somewhere beyond the ridges, unchanged in form, but altered forever in meaning. She had walked away from it without hesitation, yet the weight of that decision had not lessened. Freedom, she was beginning to understand, did not feel like escape. It felt like standing alone with no certainty beneath your feet. Behind her, Ryan remained still, allowing the silence to exist without interruption. He had not asked her to return, nor had he followed her when she left the day before. He had given her something unfamiliar, space without expectation. "You have not asked me what happened," Amina said at last, her voice calm but distant. Ryan's reply came without urgency. "You would have told me if you wished to." She turned slightly, studying him. "Most men would demand answers. I am not most men." There was no arrogance in the statement, only quiet truth. Amina let out a slow breath, her shoulders easing just enough to release the tension she had carried since the confrontation. "I ended it," she said, "before everyone." Ryan nodded once, absorbing the words rather than reacting to them. "And how did they receive that?" A faint, humorless smile touched her lips, as something unacceptable. And Khalid, he tried to hold on to what he believed was already his. Ryan's gaze sharpened slightly. And you? Amina met his eyes fully now. I refuse to belong to something that was never honest. The words lingered between them, steady and unyielding. For a moment, neither of them spoke, but the silence felt different now. Not uncertain, but grounded. Ryan stepped closer, though he kept a respectful distance. Then you have done what many cannot. Amina shook her head faintly. I have only done what I could no longer avoid. Her honesty did not weaken her, it clarified her. For a while, they remained there, the quiet stretching comfortably between them. But peace, Amina knew, was never untouched for long. Footsteps approached from beyond the hill. Amina stiffened, recognizing the rhythm before the figure even came into view. Khalid. He moved with less certainty than before, his confidence worn thin, but not entirely gone. When he reached them, his gaze shifted briefly to Ryan before settling firmly on Amina. So this is where you've chosen to stand, he said. Amina did not move. I am not hiding. Khalid exhaled slowly, his composure carefully rebuilt. You've made your point. The village has spoken. There is still a way to correct this. There is nothing to correct. There is everything to correct, he countered, his voice tightening. You've allowed emotion to override reason. You've embarrassed yourself and me. Amina's expression did not change. You were not embarrassed when you betrayed me. Khalid's jaw tensed. That was different. No, she said quietly. It was the truth. The simplicity of her response stripped his argument of its structure. For a moment he faltered. I can still offer you stability, he continued, grasping for control. A future. Respect. Amina held his gaze, her voice calm but resolute. Respect cannot be offered after it has been denied. Khalid glanced briefly at Ryan, his expression darkening. And this is what you choose instead? A stranger with no place here? Ryan did not react, his stillness more powerful than any defense. Amina stepped forward slightly, placing herself fully within the weight of her own decision. I am not choosing him instead of you, she said. I am choosing myself instead of what you expected me to accept. The distinction landed with finality. Khalid's control slipped, frustration breaking through. You will regret this. Perhaps, Amina replied, but the regret will be mine, not something imposed on me. There was nothing left for him to argue against. After a long, strained silence, Khalid turned and walked away, his steps no longer certain, his presence diminished by the absence of authority he once carried so easily. The hills grew quiet again. Amina watched until he disappeared from view, then let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. The tension did not vanish. It shifted, settling into something steadier, something she could carry without being consumed. Ryan spoke only after the silence had fully returned. And now? Amina considered the question carefully. For the first time, there was no immediate answer waiting for her, no expectation guiding her next step. That depends, she said slowly, turning to face him, on whether you still believe I came here out of obligation. Ryan met her gaze, his expression thoughtful. Did you? Amina shook her head. Not anymore. The admission was simple, but it held the weight of everything she had endured to reach it. Ryan stepped closer, though still leaving space for her to decide the distance between them. Then understand this, he said. I will not take you as a wife because of what happened in that cave. Amina nodded. I would not accept it for that reason. Their understanding aligned, not through demand, but through clarity. Then what do you want? He asked. Amina looked beyond him, toward the open land stretching endlessly past the hills. The horizon no longer felt like a boundary. It felt like a beginning. I want something that is chosen every day, she said. Not something decided once and carried without question. Ryan considered her words, then inclined his head slightly. That is not an easy path. Amina allowed a faint, genuine smile to form. Neither is the one I left behind. For a moment, nothing more needed to be said. The wind moved gently around them, no longer a force of disruption, but a quiet companion to the stillness they now shared. Amina took a step forward, not toward certainty, but toward possibility. And this time, the choice was entirely her own.